All right, so just like in any other lesson that we're going to be doing in this series, we want to start by setting up our project directory. So what we're going to do is with Houdini open, we'll go to File and Set Project. And this is going to be where we want to locate this on disk. I've been using a desktop folder here for my lesson 2 examples. Here's logo, and I'm gonna hit accept. And that's now set that folder as my sort of project home folder. That allows Houdini to make some shortcuts for that and make sure that we're kind of looking in the right place on disk when we're saving things and loading things. So that is now we've set that project folder. Let's also set where we're going to save our scene file. So let's go File, Save As. And you can see here we have a few things in this folder already. Again, this is a logo here. This is the actual Houdini logo that's in there. And we have that in that folder, and it'll be unzipped for you along with these files as well, so you can have your students catch up if they fall behind and you want to make sure that they can find a common starting point between the steps. You can have those files to use. So what we're going to do here is I'm just going to select one of these just to grab the file name, but you can name your stuff whatever you want. I'm just going to call mine live because it's kind of the live walkthrough of this. All right, so we have our HIP file saved and our project set up. So the next important thing we're going to do is we are going to set up our geometry. So we're going to set up a geometry object by hitting Tab in the network view, typing geo, and pressing enter. That is going to give us a geometry object. And again, this is going to be a container to store all of the geometry that we make at this object level. So Houdini will see everything we do in this node as a singular object. So that's just a good thing to keep in mind and to tell your students. Let's change the name of this to something a little bit more appropriate. Why don't we call it Logo Modeling? And hit enter to accept it. And now we can dive inside and start adding geometry to our scene. So the first thing we are going to do is we are going to load our Houdini logo into our scene. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit Tab and type File, and this is going to give us a file node. We'll drop that down. We can see here we have default geometry in the viewport. This is actually a BGO file on disk. This is something that is kind of just something that we allow for you to see. It's a BGO is our internal file format for Houdini, and it's something that allows us to be able to kind of see what where your object would be when you load it in, and just make sure that this is actually working. So we are loading in this BGO file from disk, but we want to look at a different file. We can load all sorts of different files using this file node, anything that Houdini recognizes. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the little file selector here. I'm going to click that. And since we've set up our project folder, we're now right here, and we can see that we have this logo folder. We can double click on that, and we can see that there's this Houdini badge flat 3D. That just basically means that I've set this up in a way that most 3D programs will like. And the real kind of behind the scenes of that is what you want to do is if you open a file up in Illustrator, you want to save it as kind of the lowest Illustrator version you can. I think the standard right now is like setting it to like Illustrator 8, I think is what the setting is. But basically that takes away a lot of the bells and whistles from later Illustrator files and allows things like 3D programs to properly open those files. So I'm going to select this and hit accept. And we can see here that we have a Houdini logo in the scene, which is colored and looking a little different, but hopefully you can see that this is obviously correct, what we've imported. And what we want to do now is just do some adjustments to this. The first thing that I'm noticing is that we're not in the right spot in our scene. We have the kind of corner of this at the origin 0, 0, 0, but we want to move it over a little bit. So we want to center it better in our scene. So let's grab the output of this file node and hit Tab and do match size. We can drop that down. So now by default, this will center the center of this geometry to the origin. But what we want to do is set the y-axis to minimum. We do this a lot. I like to do this a lot just to kind of give us a better working space that we're creating our geometry in. So we've now set this into the y-axis here as the minimum, and it's centered in the other two axes. So this sort of places us at the origin, but sitting on top of the kind of ground plane. And so now we have that set up. What we want to do is fix the color of the logo, because if we flip this around, we can see that the color is actually black. This side is tinted slightly blue because we're seeing the back side of this geometry right now. So what we want to do is we want to change the color first. So let's grab the output, hit tab, and type color. So by default, the color node is going to color our geometry white. Now, we're not actually seeing this here at this stage, which is maybe a little strange. We're seeing the edges of it look white now versus here. So we're seeing something has happened, but there is still this black color. And we're going to adjust that in a couple more steps that'll be fixed. But this is just something to note that we're adding this color to it, but there is actually still some things we need to clean up to make that color come out. So the next step we're going to do is we're going to change this logo from what's called a Bezier curve into a polygon curve. And we talked a little bit about curves in the PowerPoint that you were given to give to your students. And we talked a little bit there about the difference between Bezier curves and regular curves that are just polygonal. So we want to change this over to a polygonal curve. So if we middle click on this, we can see that there's 3 Bezier curves, and that's just the closed off areas of this logo. So here's 1. This spiral is 2, and this little corner is 3. So we have 3 Bezier curves, and we want to convert them. So what we're going to do is we're going to click the output dot, we're going to hit tab and type convert. And this node, by default, will convert things into polygons. And so what we can see now is we have a few things that have been converted. We now have these edges here. If we turned on our points, we'd be able to see that now this is made up of a whole bunch of points, and these are polygonal edges. So now we've got something that's a little bit more user-friendly for us when we want to do things like extrusions and bevels and things like that. The next thing we want to do is this blue basically denotes that this is the back face of this geometry. We want this to be the front. So we need to reverse it. And we can do that with a reverse node. Very simple. So we're going to hit the output, click the output dot of this, hit tab, type reverse, and hit enter. And when we now get to this node and change the blue display flag there, we'll see that our color of our logo is nice and white. We're seeing the backside is this blue, and that's correct because we want the backside of our geometry it always shows that kind of bluish tint, just so we can differentiate between the front and back. So we reverse the polygons now, and what we want to do also in cleaning this up is we're going to see that while we have all of these points here, we do actually have some duplicates, and it's not super obvious. But if we click this on and maybe change the point numbers, you can see that there's some, everything looks pretty well and good, but there's a few places where we have some really strange numbering. And this is kind of at the start and end point of these curves. We actually have duplicates there. There's 2 points that are right on top of each other. That's why they've got those kind of nasty looking numberings. So what we're going to do, so after we turn these on, that helps us visualize it. We'll turn it off here, the point visualization and the point number visualization. Now that we've identified the ones that we don't like, we're just going to kind of join those together. Actually, I'm going to turn this back on so we can see the results of it. And in this, we'll click on the output node here, and we'll add another node called a fuse. And what fuse does, and like the logo shows here, it's going to take any points that are really close together and basically fuse them into one. It's almost like we're like welding or like joining these two together. And so that's the idea here. There's a certain distance threshold that it has to be, that it has to overcome. It's very small, 0.001, so that things that are close together don't accidentally weld, but things that are very, very close, like basically on top of each other in computer graphics terms, will weld together. So now we can see that those point numbers are cleared up. If we go back to reverse, we can see that there's these like messy, nasty ones there. We come down to the fuse, they've all adjusted. And the point numbers have kind of adjusted accordingly as well. So that will conclude part 1 of this lesson in importing geometry, importing an Illustrator file, and then extruding this into a logo. In the next part, we're going to talk about how to extrude and bevel it and make it into its final shape. All right, let's begin part 2 of this lesson where we're going to extrude and bevel our logo. So we've cleaned up the logo. We've got the geometry the way we want it to. I'm going to turn off this visualization now. So we're just looking at the geometry. And let's now extrude the geometry of this logo. So in order to do that, we're going to click on the output dot here. We're going to hit tab and do poly X for poly extrude and change our display flag down there. So the first thing we need to do is add the distance that we want to extrude this. So we're going to come up to our distance parameter here, and we're going to type 0.15. And now we have a 0.515 extrusion. However, we have this open back. We want to actually close that in. So in order to do that, we're going to scroll down a little bit here to the output geometry and groups, and we're going to just make sure our output back is checked. That'll make sure that the back part of our geometry, kind of the original location of this polygon, is also closed and added into the geometry, creates kind of a solid piece for us to work with. So now that we've done that, we want to bevel the hard edges of this geometry. So we will click on the output of the poly extrude and hit tab and do poly bev and hit enter. We'll change our display flag down to poly bevel. And in order to only bevel the edges that we want to, we're going to turn on an exclusion here. So we're going to open the exclusion up. We're going to say ignore flat edges. We're going to check that. And from there, we're going to change the maximum normal angle to 45, just to make sure that we're not running into any beveling of edges that are close to flat, but not exactly. We want to make sure that most of them are going to stay in their rounded shape. We can see we have a lot of edges here that we don't want to be beveling. So we've done that. And now let's do our, in our offsetting, let's change the distance. So the distance here, we'll change that to 0.0125. And now we have a little bit of a bevel there. And then in the fillet section, we want to change the number of divisions just to smooth this out a little bit. We're going to change that to 5. You can see that there were some little irregularities there before we did that. That was because it was trying to do that kind of fillet with just a very flat single edge, and we needed to be able to divide it a little bit to make those kind of corners a bit smoother and not have any irregularities to them. So we've got this bevel working, but you can also see that there's a little bit of weird sort of noise, sort of strange patterns on the front of this. And that's because we have this one huge polygon that doesn't have a good number of edges. We call these n-gons, and that basically just means that there's a lot of edges that make up one polygon. And we want to make sure that these are like 4-sided or 3-sided, something like that. So what we're going to do is we are going to divide those faces. And to do that, we'll use a divide stop. So we're going to click the output dot here. Again, hit tab and type div for divide and hit enter. And now if we move our display flag down there, we will have a divide on that. Now this is maybe a little bit too strong. So what we're going to do is adjust the maximum number of edges. So here you can see that we have the maximum edges as 3. So that changes these all to be triangles. Now instead of that, let's change this to 4. And that's going to set all of our maximum the maximum number for each of these polygons to a quadrilateral, a 4-sided polygon. And as you can see, that actually changes the look of this quite a bit. Here you can see that there's still a little bit of weirdness there. And if we turn this into our smooth shaded, you can still see that we're getting a little bit of strange look there. But when we change it to be 4-sided, it actually smooths quite a bit of that out, makes the logo a little bit nicer to look at, and it's a bit more of a smooth shading than the way we had it before. So with this division, we will end up this part of our video, and this will conclude the logo modeling lesson for today. Thanks so much for joining us and watching this video. Hopefully this gives you some better ideas and understanding on how to teach these concepts to your students.